the of business development at SmartCover. This morning, we're have a very special panel put together to talk about global investment trends in water and wastewater. This is actually the first of 3 webinars being organized by SmartCover this year in collaboration with the National Association of Water Companies, otherwise known as the NAWC. The panel has a very wide background in global investments, from angel funding all the way up through late venture capital funding. And I know it's going to be a super interesting exchange. So with that, I'm going to introduce our moderator. It's Robert Powelson, President and CEO of NAWC.
Good afternoon, and thank you, John. It sounds like you're in a different time zone, but it's good to hear your voice. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank the entire corporate team at SmartCover for your steadfast commitment and support of NAWC. We have a long-standing partnership with SmartCover, and we appreciate their sponsorship of today's webinar. Our conversation today is a timely one when you consider some of the infrastructure challenges facing the drinking and wastewater sectors. I think it's fair to say there are many positive signals that water management in the U.S. is entering another great era of change and innovation. As we sit here today, water resources are being stressed due to climate-related issues such as drought, watershed degradation, and failing infrastructure. Let's face it, we're at a crossroads. To secure our most valuable, finite resource for generations to follow, we must optimize investments in our water grid. I'm proud to report that a number of NAWC member companies have been at the forefront of nurturing water innovation and supporting and investing in technologies that benefit customers and the communities they serve. As we all know, innovation often manifests new processes and work structures that transform the way we source, distribute, and treat this finite resource known as drinking water service. Through our conversation today, we will learn more about some of the exciting efficiencies that are delivering value to thousands of communities across the U.S. We will also have an opportunity to share best practices and discuss ways to foster water innovation investment. So let me take this opportunity to introduce our panelists this afternoon, starting with Sam Santong. Sam has over 15 years of experience in the water sector, which has allowed him to partner with a number of NAWC member companies. He's an investment partner at KPV Water Partners, and he's here to share some of his insights with us this afternoon. We're also honored to have Ed Quilty, CEO of Aquatic Informatics, which he founded in 2008 to protect life with open and timely water information. It's a pleasure to have both panelists with us today. And with that, I will turn it over to Sam for some opening comments. Sam?
Thanks, Rob. I'm Sam from XPV Water Partners, as Rob said. Yeah, I'm excited about this topic today, and as Rob said, it's very timely. I think we're going to focus on digital technologies and their adoption in our industry, which, in light of the last couple of years and utilities needing to do more and more with less, dealing with more and more regulations, dealing with tighter budgets, workforce limitations. Certainly, I think it's very, very timely. It's a topic I'm super passionate about. I've kind of championed a lot of our investments in the digital world here at XPV, where all we do is invest in water-related companies, including aquatic informatics, which Ed will talk about shortly. So I'm very, very excited about this conversation.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Now I'll turn it over to Ed for some opening comments as well. Ed?
Yeah, morning and afternoon, everyone. So I founded Aquatic Informatics in 2003. Before that, I was a water scientist or an aquatic ecologist, and yeah, had a pretty fun adventure for the last 20 years, building a software company in the water space. I went through many valleys of death. It's a very hard industry to build up a software company. There's lots of small companies don't survive. We were one of the fortunate few that grew to pretty significant size. Ended up having thousands of customers in dozens of countries, and yeah, had good backing by investors like XPV. Sam and I worked closely together for a number of years, and yeah, 2 years ago we were bought by Danaher, which is a global conglomerate with about 30 billion in revenue, and they own some brands you'll recognize like Hawk, Trojan, Chemtree, and Aquatic Informatics, the company I built. And so, yeah, happy to share my experience. Worked with lots of hardware vendors, lots of software companies. We acquired small software companies, worked with lots of utilities and government agencies, and both on the utility side and the environmental side. So it can provide maybe a holistic view. The U.S. Geological Survey uses one of our systems to run the U.S. National Water Information System. So hopefully I can provide some broad context and share the pains of growing an innovative software company in the water space and some of the lessons learned.
Thank you, Ed. So let's jump into our conversation. As we know, at a macro level, it's about 51,000 drinking water systems here in the U.S. and about 15,000 or so wastewater systems. So by clear indication, that's a fragmentation issue. And so when we talk about the adoption of water technology, water investment in the grid, what are some of the current trends in the water investment for water and wastewater utilities that you see out there? Obviously, we're, in the US, very bullish on the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which sets aside about $55 billion of accessible monies for public and private water systems. But in true reality, we all know on this webinar today, if we had one check written to the entire industry, it would be in excess of $1 trillion. So with that as a backdrop, let's discuss some of the current trends that you see in your interface with clients in the field.
You want me to start, Ed?
Sure, Sam.
Sure.
So we can almost look at pre-COVID and post-COVID. So pre-COVID, we were very bullish on digital technologies, and we saw the adoption kind of gaining steam. I think COVID just accelerated that. And then you talk about the infrastructure bill, which is just icing on the cake. So I think with COVID and the need to work remote and need to work with shorthanded in many cases, I think that's definitely accelerated the adoption of digital. And I would say particularly in the collection systems or distribution systems right outside of the plant. I think that's an area that's just chronically been less monitored and optimized, and we're seeing lots of growth there. I do have some comments on the fragmentation and what it means for adoption, but I'll hold on those in case Ed wants to add anything.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. We're seeing, initially at the beginning of COVID, it was actually a real tailwind for us on the digital front. We had a lot of utilities almost scrambling to move to digital environments to get their remote workforce going. So we moved a lot of customers to cloud. We've got customers in the distribution collection system and also in treatment plants. And so that was, that was a real change in the market we saw. And then over the last year, I'd say things have slowed down a little bit, and it depends. I think some areas are still going faster than others, but I think with some of the Great Resignation and workforce challenges, just getting projects up and going, and IT support and others have kind of slowing down. And that's maybe another topic around optimizing workforce. So that's an area that we have seen a continued push. But yeah, I'd agree with Sam.
It's funny you mentioned the Great Resignation and the impact it's had across many industry sectors, but our industry has not been immune to the effects of accelerated retirements And then on the front end, addressing the whole issue of new entrants that want to come into work in the water space, whether it's, entry-level engineers. So what we found during COVID and communications with some of our key, external stakeholders, i.e. public utility commissions, mayors of towns and areas, members of Congress even, alerting them to how critical the staffing levels are to running these assets. And you just can't put someone on site without proper credentials in case of a wastewater treatment facility. So let's stick on that topic of the Great Resignation, sticking to the idea or the notion of the impact you've seen with some of your clients. Obviously, it's a great storyline that here we are post-pandemic, that you really never saw headlines of water treatment or drinking water service being disrupted by the pandemic. I call it the doing the boring good. We were able to deliver water to homes and businesses and dispose of waste reliably, affordably, and with a steadfast commitment to safety and environmental compliance. But what have you seen out there? We talk a little bit about the pandemic and obviously the Great Resignation. What does this all look like going forward? And there's a lot to unpack in that question.
Yeah, I can go. So we've seen a bigger focus on more precision optimization of teams. And so rather than say, following standards or historical paths of way you might, do maintenance around a city, a move to much higher precision using data and trying to get the crews at the right time where there's likely to be problems. This could be on the sewer side, like smart cover and trying to get out maintenance before, issues happen, rather than just kind of, hitting all the sites, hit the sites that really need, to be managed. And same thing on the distribution system. There's more and more technology. I think companies like Voda and others and Setaru that have likelihood of failure algorithms. So getting all the asset information together and starting to do a bit of scenario analysis and sending crews out so you can optimize the teams you've got to do more with less. And then, with savings, you can apply that to infrastructure improvements in other areas. So just really optimizing the team. I think we've also seen, on the treatment plant side as well, a move to, especially with inflation lately, more of a desire to optimize energy and chemicals and existing assets. And so that's an area we're seeing, with companies like Hawk, combining sensors and software to do real-time control and optimization of things like coagulants and others, and energy costs to really drive down those costs as inflation goes up, and again, to optimize workforce. We are seeing a pretty big change there actually this past year.
Yeah, that's a super good point. And I'd say when we talk to utilities, whether they were private or public, perhaps a little bit more on the public side, it used to be really all around the adoption of technology was really around risk management or risk mitigation. And this concept of optimization is way more top of mind when we're talking to utilities or when we get feedback from our portfolio companies. The other thing too, as it relates to digital, is there used to be this kind of almost this roadblock of, well, I can't get rid of my people, right? If I adopt this, I can't automate things and get rid of my people. Now it's really more around, okay, well, I don't have enough people, right? So can I automate and optimize certain things to allow my people to focus on the things that they really need to get done, right? So it's this whole notion of doing more with less. We're seeing that more and more on the water and wastewater side and public and private side.
You touched on the notion of, risk management versus where we are today in terms of less people, building efficiencies, we'll touch on this later, the whole topic of resiliency, but really optimizing these assets with less people. What have you seen in terms of, CapEx and OpEx from a number of these firms that run these assets. I mean, and obviously on our side of the ledger, private water, what are you seeing there, and what's that trend line look like?
I don't know about you, Ed. Well, from what I've seen, it's very, very case by case, because as you know, some organizations want the CapEx, right? Because you get to factor that into your, whereas some others would prefer to put it on OpEx. So I think from a building a business perspective, I think it's super important. I know that's something that Aquatic did really well, is to have the flexible delivery solution so that you can package it as a CapEx project or as a more of an OpEx line, right?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think that's one of the challenges for, new companies in the space, and even ones that have been around, like my company for 20 years, providing technologies. The market's kind of challenging to figure out. It's really segmented, and it's not only large to small and innovators, leaders to laggers. It's even within large utilities, there's really innovative ones like the DC Waters and LA and East Bay Mud. And then there's others that are also large but are slower moving. And there's others that are kind of forced into innovation due to consent decrees and other issues. And then on the small utilities, they're harder to get to, and they won't have sort of necessarily the scale to support new technologies or the budget. So, but there will be some innovators there as well. So, and then as Sam said, we've tried to be flexible in providing, at least on the technology front, CapEx or OpEx sort of solutions. So we've seen the market generally move more to software or hardware as a service. So, effectively renting at lower cost up front, renting it over years. We've seen a really rapid movement during the pandemic to software as a service. That was slow moving in a lot of pockets of the market. We saw it moving faster on the environmental side. Government agencies moving to SaaS, but utilities, I'd say, were a little slower. So that has, improved. But I think on the CapEx side, we also provide, software we can buy it up front, and be interesting with the infrastructure bill and some of the, money that's available now but won't be available forever, where utilities are maybe a preference to buy stuff up front, and maybe do a multi-year support maintenance agreement. So we're seeing, but I think as Sam said, it's pretty tricky because it's not a homogenous group. It's a really fragmented, segmented market, and it's hard for technology companies to try and recognize patterns and find the right utilities to work with where they can move quickly.
It's sometimes as a recovering regulator, state and federal, I was once quoted as saying, utilities are not bastions of innovation. They're usually very risk adverse. Obviously, as it was, my quote was, it takes them 2 hours to watch 60 minutes to make a decision. And hence, when you do these type of, I call them big bet, whether it's over the customer information system or it's another type of IT solution. I remember the old word SAP and the investment in the SAP system. But I'd love to get your thoughts. I mean, this adoption rate is accelerating at a pace that we haven't seen in years, both on the electric, gas, and water side. I mean, on the electric side, 10 years ago, utilities were kind of slow rolling the notion of advanced metering infrastructure. Well, today, there's over 75 million deployed smart meters across the country. Gas companies have done a tremendous job using artificial intelligence to handle leak detection and unaccounted for gas in pipeline replacement. So let's unpack that, because I said it might be a job security issue after this webinar, but the notion of innovation, utilities, and how you see that all interfacing with customers. As a former regulator, I always wanted to know what's the value proposition, or give me the value engineering and how the customers you serve benefit. So let's take up that topic. And Sam, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, what I think we're seeing is, of course, you talk about SAP and Oracle and all the huge mega, companies that were in it that have the software depth, but not the application knowledge, right? So, and what we're seeing, and we're probably biased because we invest in those companies, is the companies that are growing and solving those problems for customers are the ones that have that application knowledge. So, Smart Cover, for instance, right? I mean, you want to do sewer monitoring, Smart Cover, that's what they do, right? They have their market share leaders. So utilities can, in a way, outsource that capability to, a group that does that day in and day out. And I think we're seeing more and more utilities buy into that and, looking for a solution as opposed to looking for a piece of hardware. One of the things that, as we talk to utilities, and we're hearing this, I would say less and less, is we used to hear maybe 10 years ago is, I actually have too much data. I don't know what to do with it, right? So I'm not going to buy another sensor because what am I going to do with it? Whereas now you've got companies like Aquatic, like Smart Cover, that provide a solution as opposed to just providing the technology. And I think that shift has happened over the last 5 years, I'd say. And that's what's really, I think, driving the adoption is utilities can actually get solutions as opposed to getting pieces of the solution.
Ed, I'll turn it over to you for some of your insights.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's so there's a lot of innovative companies out there. Sam mentioned like Smart Cover, there's Storm Harvester and Olu Edge Analytics and others that are starting to get scale, which is good. And I think there is an appetite for more innovation from utilities. I think one challenge that we have seen is that utilities tend to, or the market in general, or customers tend to feel that their workflows are somewhat unique. And so they will run a long, extended procurement process, have a lot of very specific needs. And it's very hard for small companies to scale. They'll kind of get caught up with one utility, and they'll work with them for years and have a highly customized solution. But it's actually not good for the industry because you have all these one-off sort of customized small solutions, and we're not really following the 80-20 rule. Like there is a common, again, we've got thousands of customers and most are unique, but only that sort of last 20%. So I think on a couple of fronts is on the procurement, working with other utilities to not put, tech companies through the ringer, through procurement. And then I think, on the kind of need to get behind some water specific, as Sam said, not the SAPs and Oracles, but these companies like Smart Cover and others that have the domain expertise, but they need to get to scale to lower the cost for end customers and to have a stronger, robust solution. So that, in my mind, the market sort of needs to place some bets behind some key players and help them grow. So we don't have all these small startups that are below 5 million or 2 million or below 10 million. You really need scale, and they can provide a lot more innovation at a lower cost. But that's been a challenge. I found that, again, procurement's custom, the needs are often custom, and it's challenging, I think, to bring, in those other SAPs and Oracles, they've really had they're really generic solutions, but they've been able to scale because they do follow, sort of 80%. I don't think they're not really good, can't meet all the needs of the water industry. So they need these other software players that sort of in the middle that really bring that to more domain specific. That's what I'm hoping that in those areas, if utilities can kind of play some bets and they become less risky as you've got more and more customers, they become not risky at all. You can obviously lean on other utilities and see what they've done and sort of be fast followers where it's the innovation's been demonstrated to be succsuccessful.
When we talk about, go ahead, Sam. Sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, real quick, because Ed hit on such a good point. And we see that especially with the bigger public utilities being kind of really looking for the technology provider to customize what they do for them, whereas as Ed says, 80, I'd say 95% of the solution can just be off the shelf. That's actually, and I'll say some IOUs behave like some of the bigger utilities too. That's why, Rob, when you were talking about the fragmentation of the sector, to a initial impression would be, well, that makes it harder to scale a company. But I would actually argue that for digital, this market is ideal for this, because the small to medium utilities don't have the internal capabilities, and they kind of know it, right? So, to manage a custom solution. So they actually look for the vendors to bring them best practices. So while it's less efficient to get in front of 51,000 utilities on the water side and 15,000 on the wastewater side, once you get in front of them, the small to medium ones, actually we see the adoption to be way faster at that level than at the big utility level.
And it's a good segue because, as one of my mentors once said, trying to define managed care, it's like you get 13 different definitions, depends on who you last spoke to. So let's pick up on the definition of what smart or intelligent water and wastewater utilities. What is it in your view? How would you define it?
Do you want me to go, Sam?
You go.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a fully integrated set of data-driven solutions. So it's where the utility is trying to integrate all their different data systems. As we all know, historically, they've been in silos, and it's very hard to share the data even within a department, let alone across departments. So, and there's not a lot of standardization from a technology front, which has made it difficult. But there are technologies now, even more generic stuff, where you can start connecting different databases together, and you can start running pretty sophisticated models. To build, the term obviously everyone's using pretty widely, digital twins. We can run scenario analysis of your water distribution and collection and treatment plants. So for me, I think it's really that fully integrated, data-driven decision making, and with the purpose to optimize. Mm-hmm. Again, it could be for people or chemicals or energy. So that's how I see it.
Okay.
Yeah, the fully integrated piece is the important one. The way I define it is it's using a combination of hardware, software, and telemetry to allow utilities to make better, faster decisions, right? And it's Ed says, it's the fully integrated piece. Aquatic informatics, without having their customers having sensors out in the field, you don't have any data to crunch, right? And without aquatic informatics, you've got all this data, you don't know what to do with it. Without sensors that can tell you, communicate data of what's going on in your sewer network, well, you can have that piece, that's great, but without the backend software to make sense of it, it's useless, right? And so it's this integrated piece that's the important part here in the definition, I think.
So we talk about the whole notion of water innovation and software investment. I think it's hard not to pick up on the topic of cybersecurity. As you all know, the water sector is squarely in the eyes of many Homeland Security experts, the White House, others, this industry that is yearning for stronger cybersecurity compliance, i.e. the recent events earlier this year in Oldsmore, outside of Tampa Bay. How can we, in a highly regulated industry with the EPA as an environmental regulator, state public utility commissions, in some cases with municipal water, you have mayors and town councils. How do we assure these external publics the need and the investment around cybersecurity when we're making these bets in water innovation? Love to grab your thoughts there.
Yeah, I can go, Sam. I mean, massively important cybersecurity, and I've been in digital side of water for almost 30 years now. In the last 5 years, it has just become so important. And we're all under attack. Every utility is under constant attack. Every software company, we're under attack. We've seen software companies, have some challenges, and they're experts, in some ways, but it's a very specialized area. So we've got hundreds of, in my company, hundreds of software developers, but we've got a sort of a tiger team of just focus on security. And, we trying to track best in world and follow. There's a lot of new security standards or certifications. There's ISOs. There's also like the US FedRAMP, which we're following, which are really hard security capabilities to achieve that sort of certification. And so I think they're, again, it comes back to scale. I think that there's two things. One, going to the cloud, you do get some benefits. You've got the big companies like Amazon and Google and Microsoft they can afford to pay security experts really big salaries that utilities can't. And so that's one, leveraging that security. And I think for this, I think that the smaller innovative companies that are coming in, the more they work with those companies, they'll get some benefits, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are secure. They can create gaps as well. And so I think it comes down to scale again too. If you think of a startup that's got 10 people or 20 people, it's hard for them to have world-class security. So they do have to depend on the bigger players. As they get to scale, it's kind of back to the theme about the water market supporting a handful of players that are water specific that can get to scale and also bring security. That's an area that requires significant investment. Even to get the US FedRAMP certification, you need to be federal sponsorship. It costs about $500,000 just to go through the certification. So most startups can't do that. But it does, bring in a level of expertise that we can provide to utilities that they won't, be able to do, especially the smaller ones, won't be able to hire that type of capability and skill set. I know, Sam, are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, whether there's regulation or not, utilities need to jump on this cybersecurity. I think we have to, we're in a position where we speak to a lot of different end users, right? Water utilities, we spend time with electric utilities, we talk to industrial facilities or end users. And I will say the sophistication and the level of planning and thoughtfulness that goes into cybersecurity when we ask about cybersecurity to a water utility versus an electric utility or a power plant or a chemical plant, we're talking night and day difference, right? And there's really good reasons for that, so that's fine. But I think it's really important for utilities to recognize that there is vulnerability here, and it's both at the enterprise level and at the device level, right? And I think what Ed said about the moving to the cloud, I think that goes a long way towards kind of almost outsourcing that, right? It's one thing to manage your own servers and protect them and try to do it with your own staff. Whereas if you can rely on Amazon, that's their core business or a big part of their business is doing that. In a way, you're outsourcing to the experts. And I think that can go a long way to help that.
And to pick up on that, I think, Ed, you mentioned, one of the solutions is the scalability of these technologies. And that I agree with that. I also would say a direct corollary to that is that scaling should drive greater compliance across the entire sector. That is a huge issue that we see today in the water, cyber, and we'll go further, physical security of these assets. And I think, when you talk about technology, what we've seen on the power sector side, and this is my former life as a FERC commissioner, is really requiring kind of an ISO 9000 regiment for all software providers. So meaning if I sell you a system, pipeline operator, power plant producer, that my software is cyber compliant. And that's an issue where in the water sector, we're not really having those conversations per se. And, I share that because, we talked about it earlier, 51,000 assets out there. And by the way, we are the only public utility service consumers ingest. So we can't have near misses when it comes to, an industrial control system that's been hacked or a customer information system being compromised. So I applaud you both for your insights. It's one of those topics that is really taking a lot of oxygen out of the room in a good way. And so we'll talk a little bit about it later in our conversation today. So let me shift gears. What do you know, when you look at examples of how technology is helping utilities address workforce shortages, what are some of the best practices you've seen out there, both pre and post pandemic?
I'd say probably having to help prioritize which work streams or which workflows to automate. I think having a really good handle on what your true costs of that workflow is, I think is super important. And that could be person hours, it could be equipment, fuel, whatever it is, right? I think we see a lot of utilities not having a true handle on the real cost of the cost of the opportunity cost of not doing something. So I think that's probably the area that we see the most kind of work that our companies need to do to help educate the customers is on what the cost of inaction is, or the cost of not automating something. Probably that. The second one is, I would say, it kind of goes back to the point I made before, this reluctance of giving the impression that we're trying to get rid of people, but I think that's kind of going away. So I don't think that's really a roadblock anymore. So I think having a really good sense of the cost, and then having the different departments that are involved, having them coordinated so that you don't have kind of one person at one department who's for some reason against something and then kind of derail the whole project. Because usually it's operations, engineering, IT. There's usually a couple departments that have to be bought into something. And I think having those groups work together to problem solve something, I think that goes a long way to speed up the adoption.
Yeah, and no pun here, but it's usually the legal team that ends up being the Debbie Downer to the engineers and the others that are embracing the innovation. So no offense to our lawyers on the webinar today. So you mentioned the cost of not automating. Again, we look at things through the lens of value engineering. So, regulators want to know what is the value proposition? We talked about we used the word efficiencies. So how do you sell all this to a regulator that's going to provide cost recovery for these, I'll call them strategic investments?
Yeah, it's definitely, we are seeing traction, but it's still hard. I think, in the last year, we are, as we talked about earlier, seen a bigger appetite for optimization and innovation. I can't say that was, really building as quickly as we would have liked over the last 5 years, but in the last year or two, certainly it has. So, again, I think what we're doing with Aquatic Informatics, we're in partnership with Hawk, which many people know is a big sensor and IoT manufacturer, working with their existing systems to try and, sort of iterate without a major, step change. And so going where there's existing systems and trying to provide further optimization. So we can have, say Hawk real-time controls, and then on top of that, we would provide some further optimization using data science. So bringing other data sets and doing optimization, and starting kind of small and showing, what kind of savings before they go full scale. So maybe start at one treatment plant, maybe one parameter. I mentioned like coagulants before. We could start there and demonstrate the type of savings that you can provide, and then slowly stepwise through there. It's hard to go for most fields, bit risky to go all in all at once. We accept that you can sometimes need to start small and demonstrate and move up. That being said, once that's done, doing that again and again with 50,000, kind of utilities doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, we can benefit from those case studies and share. There's obviously a lot of associations that bring utilities together, and I think that's if we can speed up once we've really demonstrated these savings, and again, there's a lot of commonalities across utilities that 80, or Sam said 95%, it probably was closer to that. I think leveraging that, so not having to demonstrate it again and again and again, that's really been sort of the pattern, I think, for the last 20 years. Each utility wants to see it themselves. So I think we need to find a way to get past that, as we do in all other areas of our lives. We see technology, whether it's for personal banking or others. These we're more quick to adopt them, but water has been a little slower.
We didn't touch on the topic of resiliency, but I want to pause for a moment and open up the floor to our participants on the call for any questions that you may have of our panelists, and then we're gonna hit on the topic of water grid resiliency. So let's open it up. If someone has a question for Sam or Ed, we'll give you an opportunity here to ask your question.
I'm going to start singing if we don't have any questions. So everyone's in trouble.
Let's hear it.
I'm sure we have a NAWC member on the call that has a burning question that they want to ask our panelists. Okay, well, we'll come back. Let's pick up on the topic of water grid resiliency. It's a topic that, I don't care what publication you pick up or what news article you catch on, one of the trade publications or media outlets. This whole notion of, look, there's obviously changes in the veracity of these weather events and the impact they're having on these critical assets has certainly caught the eye of policymakers, both here in the US and abroad. So we talk about the adoption of innovative technologies. What can we see in terms of that adoption rate to help with resiliency of these assets? And that's a loaded question, but Sam, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I think the reality is, of course, you've got these extreme weather events that you talked about. You have, urbanization, industrial growth, all putting more and more pressure on the existing infrastructure that's already crumbling under its own weight, right? And so, and this notion of pouring more concrete, whether that's to, build bigger pipes or expand the capacity of existing treatment plants, that's less and less of an option, either because the plants are landlocked or because you have to dig up under very expensive infrastructure to replace pipes or build new pipes. So I think extending the life of the footprint we already have, I think that's the name of the game, and that's why I think digital solutions can make a big difference here. Excuse me. So I think it starts with looking at, okay, what do we have? A lot of utilities don't necessarily always have a full kind of sense of the footprint and the assets that they have and the condition that they're in. So it's, what do we have? What condition is it in? And how can we use what we already have, whether that's by turning certain parts of the infrastructure into retention basins, or using the natural the environment as a source of storage or treatment in some ways. That's probably I'd say that's one of the biggest benefits of digital solutions is around that. Ed, anything you want to add to that?
I think well said. I think it's I think that I can think of some examples where there are some really sophisticated innovations coming in, where a storm hits part of a city, you've got available capacity in your collection system in another area. You can forecast that this is going to hit the city or the town, and then you can start actively pumping in advance to push into your use other areas that are underutilized in your collection system and prep for that storm. So we're seeing that starting to take place. There's like Storm Harvester, a company out of Ireland, we've seen doing that, and others. And so I think that's an exciting area, and that's exactly it. Like optimize existing infrastructure. We know, these events are going to become more frequent and more extreme. I think, have to prepare for that, and won't be able to get out there and replacing infrastructure or building new infrastructure in time to keep up with it. I think it's happening too fast. So as Sam said, you have to optimize what you have, and technology can definitely help. Hydrologic forecasting, hydraulic forecasting in the pipes, and then using data science to help optimize those very tricky, fast-moving situations where computers are obviously built for exactly that, taking a lot of information and processing it quickly. And so that's an area I think is really exciting, and we'll see huge benefits moving forward in the water industry.
We do have a question. Thank you, Ed. We have a question from Kendra Morris. How do you reconcile the need for increased cybersecurity with the increased deployment of automated and innovative digital tools?
I think, well, they go hand in hand, right? So the more smart things you have in your network, the more points of attacks you have. And that's why I think it's important to think about cybersecurity in terms of your whole enterprise kind of scale, but also at the device level, right? And yeah, I think they just go hand in hand. The more things we have, communicating throughout our infrastructure, then the more opportunities there are for cyber attacks, and the more damage they can do, especially if there's two-way communication.
And if I could just follow up with that, this is Kendra. So one of the things that we're seeing in the utility side is that we get multiple different new pieces of hardware coming and collecting the data. They don't communicate with each other, right? So if there's ever an opportunity that you see out there for a cybersecurity provider to help combine all of that and offer a combined package to a utility, I would find that very valuable. When you're coming to us and saying, hey, we not only have a hardware solution for your issue in the collection or distribution system, but we're also coming with a cybersecurity solution that'll help you not only with our product, but with other ones.
No, point well taken. And we see, oh, sorry, go ahead then.
I was going to say exactly, well taken. We're seeing that. It's interesting. So the company I built up, we actually were hardware agnostic, still are. We connect to any, so we connect to any device out there, or any vendor, pull it together, provide security with that. And now that we're part of Danaher and working with companies like Hawk and others, we're working to have that highly integrated. But at the end of the day, we can really integrate with almost any data source, database, sensor, others, and provide a holistic cybersecurity solution there.
Thank you.
Kendra, thank you for your question. So going back to the topic of resiliency, going back over probably the last decade, how utilities in general are making, we use weather forecasting now, and some utilities have hired their own in-house meteorologists to help with weather modeling. There's been, unfortunately, because of the impact some of these storms have had on these assets, property and casualty insurers have raised rates to insure these risks. But we go back to the topic of innovation and predictive analytics. There's certainly something to be said for the ability to use these type of analytical tools to not only look at ways to invest and reinforce your infrastructure, but what I heard you both say earlier is use that infrastructure more efficiently. So that being said, what are your thoughts on some other technologies that are out there that can be applied across the water, electric, and gas sectors that would, again, come at a cost of, whether the climate goal objective, a resiliency objective, cost savings objective, what are we missing out there in this conversation?
Here, well, I think you, yeah, okay, I'll go, I'll start, but I think, you know, you talked about, we talked about AMI, right? Smart meters, 75 million, I think was the number. That's an area that makes sense, right? It's the cash register for utilities, and there is a way to automate that, so that makes a lot of sense. We see, of course, we've talked about smart cover a few times here, but we see that as an area that's just starting to inflect, right? It's less than 1% of manholes are monitored in the US, and we're seeing that grow very, very, very rapidly because it's sort of the next frontier of CapEx and OpEx that can be either delayed or completely saved, and there's billions of dollars in there, right? So that's an area that we see a lot. I'd say there's probably a broader area of stormwater management that's a big area for opportunity for improvement. And then leak detection in the water sector, at least in North America, has certainly gotten a lot of traction, but there's probably a lot more room to go, especially if we compare it to some older geographies like in parts of Europe where leak detection is a lot more prevalent. And I would say in general, looking at some of the European countries, Western European countries, we can kind of see where things are going, because I'd say that the need for them is more acute, and the regulatory frameworks are probably more conducive to innovation. So you can look at what's happening there to get a sense of what's going to happen in North America.
Yeah, maybe add to that. Yeah, I think how things will unfold and probably quickly is a more holistic view. Like the Smart Water Association, SWAN, and others are certainly focusing on this with digital twins and smart water networks. But we're seeing this holistic view. So there's obviously, you know, lots of very detailed, sophisticated weather forecasts for, you know, precipitation, and we've got river forecast centers, and we've got groundwater levels. Again, USGS is one of our customers. We've got access to data. We don't see that widely used, you know, in utilities. So, you know, the storm's approaching, and there can be, you know, rather than just waiting and reacting, being proactive and having that built into your systems. You can tap into these systems, you can downscale that data to your local town or city and combine it with some of the local, you know, sensors you might have, that which is, you know, growing rapidly, as Sam said, like Smart Cover and others. And so connecting that, these publicly available data sources, downscaling it to your needs, and you know, and there are service providers, there's companies that'll do this. You don't need that necessarily the expertise. Not all utilities can have a meteorologist or a hydrologist, you know, on staff. Most can't. And but there are lots of services available, the data available, and tools to make it, you know, fairly easily applicable to your area, and getting out in front of it. And like I said, you know, I give the example of Storm Harvester in Ireland, where they're helping, they see a storm coming, helping pump in advance of the storm into areas that can have a bit more capacity. And I think that's going to be the model moving forward, looking at, you know, weather systems coming, upstream, downstream effects, looking at groundwater, and with Smart Cover as well, looking at that as the water table rises, it can be a latency there. All those impacts, it's all data we have, and just combining them is not something that's being done well now or by many. And that's an area I think will and has to improve in the coming years.
Yeah, and something that breaks down the silos, right? And either within the utility, between the different departments, like the classic example, and I've actually seen it live, is, you know, 1 year a city repaves the road, and then next year they replace line, not because it broke, but because that was the plan. And so, you know, if you had CMMS speak to capital investment planning and have a way to automate some of that, you can get rid of some of that. So it's important within a utility, and then within the city that the utility operates into. There's a huge opportunity there.
Sam, imagine you just hit on a sensitive subject, but I remember, you know, very proud of, you know, our gas distribution operators in Pennsylvania that would, you know, they accelerated their pipeline replacement and got rid of a lot of this cast iron, bare steel. It was really hazardous beyond its useful life, and we had a couple tragic events. Well, to your point, wouldn't it have been nice that the that the water and gas company and the cable company were coordinating? So you right away, one trench, one pavement contractor. And this goes on every day across the US where there's that lack of coordination. And, to your point, customers get fed up because we've got to, invest in this infrastructure, but why can't it be done with collaboration and a commitment to, having, like I said, one trench, one asphalt, and maybe sharing those savings in some type of rate case proceeding. So you sound like a suffering regulator in the making. We have about 3 minutes, and I'd like to go back to our audience and seek any questions that our audience may have of our panelists today. It's a really good topic. I know we've covered a lot of good ground here today. So again, we'll open it up for questions.
Maybe while we wait for other questions, I see a second part to Kendra's question around how do we encourage and reassure concerned stakeholders about putting our data out there. I think the one thing to just remind everyone is all of our data is in the cloud. Banking, medical, everything's in the cloud. So I think our water data in the grand scheme of things is not the biggest of our concern in terms of stuff that's in the cloud. So I think it's important to encourage and remember our stakeholders and ratepayers that most of the data is already out there. So.
Thank you.
Well, let me take this opportunity to remind everybody as we get through the summer months here that we will be embarking on our 2022 Water Summit, which is going to be held in outside of Miami on September 12th through the 14th at the JW Marriott Turnberry Resort. And our RSVPs, as Mike mentioned earlier, we have an early bird pricing, which ends on Thursday, June the 30th. So I want to give a quick shout out to everybody, reminding you to sign up for this event. Our theme this year is tapping into tomorrow. So there will be a continued conversation and emphasis around water innovation. So I encourage you, if you haven't done so, please go to the NAWC website and register for the 2022 summit. I want to take this opportunity to thank both Sam and Ed, along with our partners at SmartCover, for sponsoring today's conversation. Sam and Ed, thank you for your time and your expertise, sharing it with the NAWC members. I thought we hit on a number of high-level topics. And again, we appreciate your time here today with us. With that,
thanks for having us.
Great to have you. With that, we are going to adjourn today. And please continue to focus on our upcoming events by going to our website at www.nawc.org. And please stay informed by reading our Week in Water publication, along with our Thursday updates from Rick Hall on our federal legislative outreach, as well as my bi-monthly CEO letter. Thank you all for your participation. Have a great July 4th holiday. And again, thank you, Team SmartCover, for bringing us together today on this important topic.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
You, everyone.